At the end of the previous case, the black file disappeared. Not stolen, not destroyed, not recovered. It simply vanished. And after everything that had happened, investigators believed that was the end. They were wrong. 3 nights later, at a small railway station in Northern Europe, a night conductor noticed something unusual. One passenger was sitting in a carriage that should have been almost empty. The train was scheduled to leave at 11:40 p.m. The station was quiet. Rain covered the windows. The platform lights flickered through the mist. The conductor walked through the carriage checking tickets. There were only 11 passengers. 10 tickets matched the system. The 11th passenger did not. He was sitting beside the window. He wore a long dark coat. His hands rested calmly on an old black suitcase. He did not look at his phone. He did not read. He did not sleep. He simply watched the darkness outside. The conductor stopped beside him. "Ticket, please." The man slowly looked up. He handed over a small paper ticket. The conductor examined it. The paper looked old, much older than the railway tickets normally used. But the destination was correct. The seat number was correct. Everything appeared normal. Almost everything. The conductor scanned the ticket. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The system showed no passenger assigned to that seat. The conductor looked at the man. "You bought this at the station?" The passenger nodded. "When?" The man looked toward the window. Then he said something that made the conductor uncomfortable. "Not yet." The conductor thought he had misheard him. "What?" The passenger looked directly at him. "I said not yet." The conductor stepped back. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the passenger folded the ticket and placed it inside his coat. The conductor decided not to argue. He checked the other passengers. Then he returned to the front of the train. At 11:40 p.m., the train departed. 20 minutes later, the conductor noticed something else. The passenger was still sitting in exactly the same position. He had not moved. The suitcase was still beside him. The rain continued outside. The conductor walked past him again. This time the passenger spoke first. "Is this train still going to the last station?" The conductor stopped. "Yes." The passenger looked at him. Then he quietly said, "Then you still have time." The conductor did not understand. Time for what? The passenger said nothing. He turned back toward the window. And that was the last moment the conductor clearly remembered seeing his face. Because when the train arrived at the next station, the passenger was no longer there. But his suitcase was. And inside that suitcase was something investigators would later connect to the black file. Something that should not have existed. A photograph, a railway ticket, and a black envelope. The same kind of envelope that had appeared in the previous cases. The black file was gone. But apparently, something from it had survived. And it was now traveling by train. With a passenger, nobody could officially prove had ever been there. The train continued through the night. At 12:18 a.m., it reached the next station. The conductor began his usual inspection. He checked every carriage, every seat, every passenger. Then he reached the seat near the window. It was empty. The man was gone. There was no sound of a door opening. No passenger had seen him leave. The conductor checked the connecting doors between the carriages. Locked. He checked the toilet. Empty. He checked the rear platform. Empty. The train had never stopped anywhere between the stations. There was nowhere the man could have gone. But his suitcase was still there. The conductor stood beside it for several seconds. He did not touch it. Then he noticed something underneath the seat. A second ticket. He picked it up. This one was different. It had no passenger name, no booking number, no barcode. Only 3 things were printed on it: a seat number, a destination, and a time. 3:17 a.m. The conductor looked at the clock. 12:21 a.m. He placed the ticket back down. Then he opened the passenger manifest on his handheld device. 10 passengers. Exactly 10. He refreshed the list. Still 10. He looked at the empty seat, then at the suitcase. The passenger had never existed in the system. Yet someone had physically sat there. Someone had handed him a ticket. Someone had spoken to him. And someone had watched him disappear. The conductor reported the incident to railway security. 2 officers boarded the train at the next station. They asked the conductor to describe the passenger. Male, approximately 40 years old, dark hair, pale face, long black coat, old leather shoes, no visible identification, no phone, no unusual behavior, except for one detail. The conductor remembered the man's voice. It was strangely calm, almost emotionless. The officers asked what he had said. The conductor repeated the sentence. "Then you still have time." One officer frowned. "Time for what?" "I don't know." "Did he say anything else?" The conductor hesitated, then remembered something. Just before walking away, he had asked the passenger where he was getting off. The man had looked at him and answered, "Where the others stopped." The officer wrote the sentence down. Then he asked the conductor another question. What did he look like? The conductor gave the same description again. But when the officer opened the station's security system, something became impossible. The passenger was not visible anywhere, not entering the station, not buying a ticket, not walking onto the platform, not boarding the train. There was no footage of him, only the conductor's memory, and one empty seat. Then they checked the train's internal camera. The result was even stranger. The camera showed the carriage. It showed every passenger. It showed the conductor walking through the aisle. But when he reached the mysterious passenger's seat, the image suddenly distorted. For exactly 3 seconds, the screen went black. Then the picture returned. The seat was occupied. But the passenger's face was no longer visible. Only his dark coat and his suitcase. The officers watched the recording again and again. On the third viewing, one of them noticed something in the reflection of the window. A second figure was standing behind the passenger. The figure was almost impossible to see. But it was there, and the conductor had never mentioned anyone standing behind him. The officer paused the footage, zoomed in, then froze. The second figure appeared to be holding something, a black folder. The same black folder that had disappeared 3 nights earlier. The officer looked at the conductor. "Do you recognize this?" The conductor stared at the screen. His face changed, because he recognized the folder. He had seen it before, not on the train, not at the station, but in the photographs from the Black File investigation. And suddenly, the missing passenger was no longer the biggest mystery. The real question was much worse. Why was the Black File appearing inside the train before anyone knew the passenger existed? By morning, the railway company had opened a formal investigation. The first question was simple. Who bought the ticket? They checked the station's ticket machines. Nothing. They checked the ticket office. Nothing. They checked online bookings. Nothing. They checked online bookings, made between 10 p.m. and midnight. Nothing. There was no purchase matching the mysterious passenger, but the conductor still had the ticket. That meant someone had printed it. The ticket was sent to a specialist for examination. The result came back several hours later. The paper was genuine. The ink was genuine. The printing method was genuine. But there was a problem. The ticket had been printed using a railway system that had been discontinued 23 years earlier. The conductor refused to believe it. He had worked for the railway for 14 years. He knew the old system. He remembered the machines. But the machine that produced this ticket had been removed from every station long ago. The investigators searched the railway archives. They found the old ticket format. Same paper, same numbering system, same security pattern, even the same tiny mark near the bottom edge. Then they noticed something else. The ticket number belonged to a sequence from an old passenger database, a database that had been permanently closed in 2003. The investigators searched the number. One result appeared, a passenger record. The name was incomplete. Only one letter remained, M. Destination, North Station. Departure, 11:40 p.m. Seat, 17. Date, October 14th, 2003. The investigators checked the modern train schedule. The train had departed at 11:40 p.m. The seat was number 17. But the date was completely different. The mysterious ticket was issued for the present journey, yet the number belonged to a journey from 23 years earlier. They went deeper. They searched the 2003 passenger manifest. The record showed 17 passengers. 16 passengers had complete names. The 17th record was marked M, unconfirmed. There was no age, no address, no identification, no payment information, only the seat number. The investigators then searched for the original conductor from 2003. He had retired years earlier. They found him living in a small town several hours away. When shown the old passenger record, he immediately became uncomfortable. He remembered the journey. He remembered the weather. He remembered the train being almost empty. And he remembered seat 17. The investigators asked him who had been sitting there. He stared at the record, then said, "I don't remember his name. Do you remember his face?" The old conductor remained silent. Finally, he said, "Yes." "What did he look like?" The old conductor looked toward the window. Then he gave them the same description. Dark coat, pale face, old suitcase, quiet voice. The investigators exchanged looks. The same passenger had supposedly appeared 23 years earlier, but the old conductor added one detail. He asked me the same question. "What question?" The old man answered, "Is this train still going to the last station?" The investigators asked what happened after that. He said the passenger disappeared before the train reached its destination, just like the modern case. But there was something else, something he had never reported. The old conductor leaned forward. He left something behind. What? A photograph. The investigators asked where it was. The old man shook his head. "I gave it to railway security. They checked the archives. There was no photograph, no report, no evidence, nothing, except one handwritten note attached to the old passenger record. The note contained only 6 words. Do not record his arrival." The investigators stared at the sentence. Then they noticed the handwriting. It matched the handwriting found on the black envelope from the mysterious suitcase. And that changed the investigation completely, because the passenger was not simply missing from the railway records. Someone had deliberately removed him for at least 23 years. And now he had appeared again, on the same train, in the same seat, at the same time, with the same suitcase. And this time, someone had brought the black file with him. The investigators now had a problem. The passenger had been seen, the conductor remembered him, the suitcase existed, the ticket existed, and the old railway records appeared to describe the same man, but there was still no proof that the passenger had actually boarded the train, so they returned to the station. This time, they examined every camera, not just the platform cameras. They checked the entrance, the ticket hall, the stairs, the corridors, the platform, even the cameras facing the railway tracks. They watched the recordings from 2 hours before departure until 30 minutes after the train left. Hundreds of people appeared, passengers, staff, taxi drivers, maintenance workers, but not the mysterious man. He never entered the station. He never walked onto the platform. He never approached the train. Yet the conductor had spoken to him inside carriage 7. There was only one explanation. Someone had opened the carriage door after the last camera view, but the train doors were electronically monitored. Every opening was recorded. They checked the system. No door had opened, not once. The investigators then checked the internal camera. The recording showed the passenger sitting in seat 17, but when they watched the exact moment the train departed, something strange happened. The passenger did not move. He did not stand. He did not disappear. The image simply changed. One frame showed him sitting there. The next frame showed an empty seat. No transition, no movement, just an empty seat. The timestamp jumped forward by exactly 1 second. One investigator replayed the footage, then slowed it down. Frame by frame, at the moment the passenger disappeared, the camera captured the window reflection. For less than a second, another image appeared, a railway platform. But it was not the platform the train had left. It looked old. The station sign was different. The tracks were different. And behind the glass stood several people, all of them facing the train. The investigator zoomed in. There were 5 figures. One appeared to be a railway worker. Another appeared to be a woman. 3 were almost impossible to identify, but the 5th figure was unmistakable. The passenger. He was standing on the platform, outside the train, at the exact moment he was supposed to be sitting inside it. The investigators checked the station's historical photographs. The platform in the reflection had existed once. It had been demolished in 2003, the same year as the old passenger record. That should have been impossible. But the contradictions continued. The suitcase was examined. It contained no fingerprints, no hair, no fibers, nothing that could identify its owner. Inside was the photograph. The investigators removed it carefully. It showed the same old platform, the same train, and the same passenger. But this time, he was standing beside the carriage. The photograph was dated October 14, 2003, the exact date of the old railway record. One investigator turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back, 3 words, "He never left." Then another detail was noticed. The photograph showed 17 passengers boarding the train, but the official manifest listed 16. The missing passenger was standing clearly in the photograph, yet nobody had recorded him. The investigators began comparing the old case with the new one. Same train route, same seat, same time. Same passenger, same suitcase, same question, and the same missing record. There was only one major difference. In 2003, the passenger disappeared. In the present case, his suitcase remained. And inside that suitcase was evidence connected to the black file. The investigators now faced a terrifying possibility. Perhaps the passenger was not trying to hide from the railway system. Perhaps the railway system had been designed to hide him. Then they discovered one final contradiction. The modern train had no seat 17. Carriage 7 went from seat 16 directly to seat 18. There had been no seat 17 for years. Yet the passenger's ticket said, seat 17, and the conductor remembered seeing him sitting there. The investigators checked the train again. There was no seat 17. There was only a blank section of wall. But when they compared it with an old photograph from 2003, there had been a seat there, and someone had been sitting in it, the same man. The passenger nobody recorded. And suddenly, the mystery became much darker. Because if seat 17 no longer existed, where had the passenger actually been sitting? The investigators removed the wall panel beside seat 16. Behind it, they expected to find wiring. Instead, they found an old metal frame. It was covered in dust. The frame had been sealed behind the modern carriage wall. Inside was a small compartment, no larger than a suitcase. The railway engineers said it should not have existed. The carriage had been rebuilt years earlier. Every section had supposedly been inspected, yet the hidden compartment was still there. Inside was an old leather folder, black, almost identical to the black file. The investigators opened it carefully. There were photographs, dozens of them, all showing railway stations, different countries, different years, different trains. But the same passenger appeared in almost every photograph, always wearing the dark coat, always carrying the same suitcase, always standing near a train. The dates were impossible. One photograph was dated 1981, another was dated 1996, another was dated 2003, another was dated 2014. The newest photograph was dated only 3 days earlier. The investigators stared at it. It showed the station where the mysterious passenger had supposedly boarded the modern train. But the photograph had been taken before the train arrived, and standing near the platform was the same man, holding the same suitcase. The investigators checked the photograph's metadata. There was none. They examined the film. It was genuine, not digitally created, not altered. The photograph had been developed from physical film. Then they found something even stranger. On the back of every photograph was a single time. The time was always different, except for one, 3:17 a.m. That time appeared on 3 photographs. The first was from 2003. The second was from 2014. The third was from 3 days ago. The investigators placed the photographs beside each other. The passenger's position was almost identical. Same posture, same suitcase, same expression. But the background changed. The stations changed. The trains changed. The technology changed. The passenger did not. One investigator asked the obvious question, "How old is he?" Nobody answered. Then they noticed a photograph at the bottom of the folder. It was different. There was no passenger in it. Instead, it showed a railway control room. On a desk sat the black file. The photograph was dated, tomorrow. The investigator assumed it was a printing error. Then he turned it over. A handwritten message appeared. The file returns with the passenger. Nobody spoke. Because the black file had disappeared 3 nights earlier, it had never been recovered. Yet the photograph showed it sitting inside a railway control room. They searched the room shown in the photograph. It was an old control room that had been abandoned years ago. They traveled there immediately. The building was empty. Dust covered everything. Broken windows allowed cold air to move through the corridors. They entered the control room. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one investigator noticed a desk. The same desk from the photograph. He approached it slowly. There was nothing on top. No folder. No papers, nothing. Then he noticed a small digital clock on the wall. It was still working. The time was 3:16 a.m. The investigators looked at one another. The clock changed. 3:17 a.m. A sound came from the corridor. A single footstep. Then another. Slow. Measured. Someone was walking toward the control room. The investigators turned. The corridor was empty. Then the sound stopped. One investigator looked down. A black suitcase was sitting on the floor. Nobody had seen it arrive. He opened it. Inside was the photograph they had just found. But the image had changed. The passenger was no longer standing outside the station. He was standing inside the control room. Behind him was the same desk, and on that desk was the black file. The investigator looked at the real desk. It was empty. Then he looked back at the photograph. Something had changed again. A new figure had appeared behind the passenger. A person the investigators recognized immediately. The railway conductor from the present-day train. But he was not standing in the photograph as an observer. He was sitting in the missing seat 17. And beneath the photograph was a handwritten sentence. Next time, he will not travel alone. The investigators finally understood. The passenger had not been appearing randomly. Every appearance was connected to a specific moment, a specific train, a specific person, and always 3:17 a.m., but they still did not know why, until they found the final photograph. It showed the passenger standing beside a train. The date was tomorrow, and this time, the train had already arrived. The investigators stopped looking for the passenger. They began looking for the pattern. Every appearance had three things in common: a train, the same seat, and the time, 3:17 a.m. But there was one more connection. Every journey had been followed by a disappearance. In 2003, a railway employee disappeared after seeing the passenger. In 2014, a woman vanished from a train platform. 3 years later, a security officer disappeared after opening a sealed railway archive. And now the black file had vanished. The investigators placed all 4 cases on a timeline. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The passenger appeared first. Then someone discovered something they were not supposed to see. Then the evidence disappeared. Finally, the official records changed. The black file had not been the beginning. It had been part of the pattern. The investigators returned to the old folder. There were 42 photographs. They arranged them chronologically. The passenger appeared in every one. But in several photographs, another detail was visible. A black folder. Sometimes on a seat, sometimes on a desk, sometimes inside a suitcase, sometimes lying beside railway tracks. The black file had been present long before the investigators knew it existed. That raised the most important question. Who was the passenger? They searched every database they could access. Birth records, passport records, railway employment records, missing person reports, border crossings. Nothing. No identity matched him. Then an investigator noticed something. The passenger's face had appeared in an old railway photograph taken in 1981. The image was enlarged. The man's face was clear. He looked exactly the same. Not similar, exactly the same. No aging, no change. The investigator compared it with the newest photograph. Same face, same eyes, same scar near the eyebrow, same dark coat. Even the suitcase appeared identical. It had crossed decades without changing. The investigators considered several explanations. Maybe the photographs were fake. Maybe someone had been impersonating the same man. Maybe the railway records were corrupted. Maybe the entire story had been constructed around a coincidence. But then they found a witness, an elderly railway worker who had been employed in 1981. He remembered the photograph. More importantly, he remembered the passenger. The investigators showed him the modern photograph. The old man immediately became silent. Then he said, "He came every night for 1 week." The investigators asked what happened. He was waiting for a train. Which train? The old man shook his head. There was no train. The investigators looked confused. What do you mean? He stood on the platform at 3:17 every night. But no train arrived? No. Then why did he keep waiting? The old man looked directly at them. Because he knew one would eventually come. The investigators asked what happened on the 7th night. The old man lowered his voice. That was the night the train arrived. And the passenger boarded? No. The old man paused. He was already inside it. The room became silent. The investigators asked him to explain. He refused. Instead, he pointed toward the photograph. Look at the windows. They examined the image. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then they noticed the reflection. The passenger was standing on the platform. But his reflection was not. His reflection was sitting inside the train, in seat 17. The same seat that no longer existed. The investigators stared at the image. Then the old man spoke again. He wasn't traveling on the train. Then what was he doing? He was waiting for someone. Who? The old man looked at them. You. That sentence changed everything. The investigators returned to the folder. They searched every photograph again, and now they noticed something they had missed. In the background of each photograph, there was always another person. Not the same person. Different people, different years, different locations. But each person was connected to a black file investigation. And in the newest photograph, the person standing behind the passenger was one of the current investigators. The photograph had been taken 3 days earlier, before they had ever seen it, before they knew the passenger existed, before they opened the hidden compartment. That meant the photograph was not recording the past. It was predicting what would happen. Just like the first case, the signal that predicted death. The investigators finally understood the connection. The black file was not simply documenting impossible events. It was recording events before they happened. And the passenger was somehow moving between those events. But one question remained. If the passenger could appear in photographs before the events happened, then who was taking the photographs? They searched the folder one final time. At the very bottom was a photograph they had never noticed. It showed the passenger sitting alone inside a train. Across from him was an empty seat, seat 17, and on the seat was the black file. Written beneath the photograph were 4 words: "Wait for the last passenger." Then the clock in the investigation room stopped, 3:17 a.m., and somewhere outside, a train whistle sounded. There was no railway line anywhere near the building. The train whistle came again. One long sound, then silence. The investigators stood motionless. There was no railway line near the building, no station, no tracks. Yet the sound had come from somewhere outside. They rushed to the window. Nothing. Only darkness. Then the investigator holding the photograph noticed something. The image had changed. The passenger was no longer alone. Someone was now sitting opposite him. The face was hidden in shadow, but the clothing was familiar. It belonged to one of the investigators. The first theory was simple. Someone was manipulating the evidence. Perhaps the passenger was an ordinary man working with someone inside the railway system. The photographs could have been fabricated. The old records could have been altered. The mysterious tickets could have been planted. And the disappearing passenger could have been an elaborate escape. It was possible. But one fact destroyed the theory. The 1981 photograph existed before the modern railway systems were installed. There was no digital technology capable of creating it, and the elderly railway worker had independently remembered the passenger. The second theory was stranger. Perhaps the passenger was a time traveler. He appeared at the same locations decades apart. He never seemed to age. He carried objects from different periods, and the photographs sometimes appeared to show events before they happened. Maybe he was moving backward and forward through time. Maybe the black file was not a file at all. Maybe it was a record of events from different points in time. But this theory created another problem. If the passenger could travel through time, why did he always appear at 3:17 a.m.? Why the same seat? Why the same trains? Why the same suitcase? There had to be a reason. The third theory came from the old railway records. The passenger might not be a person in the normal sense. He might be a phenomenon, something that appeared whenever certain events were about to occur. The railway workers had different names for him over the decades. The midnight passenger, the man without a ticket, the last traveler. But every story described the same thing. A man who appeared before something disappeared. A person, a document, a memory, sometimes an entire record. The investigators found one particularly disturbing report. It came from 1996. A railway employee had written, "Passenger seen at 3:17, no ticket, no arrival recorded." The next page contained only one sentence. Employee no longer remembers seeing him. The investigator reading the report stopped. They checked the employee's name. He had lived another 30 years. But when interviewed in 2018, he had denied ever working on the railway. The records proved he had. His memory did not. That suggested something even more disturbing. Maybe the passenger did not simply disappear. Maybe he caused people to forget him. The fourth theory was the most frightening. The passenger could be connected to the black file itself. Perhaps the file created the passenger. Perhaps every impossible case produced another piece of him. The signal, the witness, the room, the photograph, the call, the file, and now the passenger. Each case seemed to reveal another part of the same mystery. The investigators compared the cases. A signal predicted a death. A witness remembered tomorrow. A room had no beginning. A man appeared in a photograph. A call came from 317. A file changed overnight. And now, a passenger existed without a record. 6 impossible events. 1 repeating time. 1 repeating symbol. 1 repeating presence. The passenger. Then they discovered something that challenged every theory. The suitcase had been photographed before. Not once. Not twice. Hundreds of times. The same suitcase appeared in old railway photographs across Europe. Different decades. Different trains. Different countries. Always beside the passenger. The investigators enlarged one photograph from 1958. The suitcase was there. They enlarged another from 1974. Same suitcase. Another from 1981. Same suitcase. Another from 2003. Same suitcase. And the newest photograph. Same suitcase. There was no reasonable explanation. Unless the suitcase itself was not ordinary. They opened the original again. There was a hidden compartment. Inside it was a small piece of paper. Only one sentence was written on it. The passenger is not the carrier. The investigators stared at the words. If the passenger was not carrying the mystery, then what was? They examined the suitcase again. Nothing. Then one investigator noticed a tiny metal plate inside the handle. A number was engraved into it. 317. The same number, the same time, the same impossible connection. They searched railway archives for that number. The result returned instantly. It was not a seat number. It was not a train number. It was not a ticket number. It was an old emergency code. The code had been discontinued decades ago. Its meaning was simple. Unidentified passenger. The investigators looked at each other. Then the computer screen changed. A new record appeared. It had no name, no identification, no location, only a timestamp. 3:17 a.m. Arrival confirmed. The investigators checked the clock. It was 3:16. They waited. 1 minute later, the screen changed again. Departure confirmed. But nobody had entered the room. Then a final message appeared. Passenger count, 18. There were only 4 investigators inside. They counted again. 4. Then one of them heard breathing behind him. He turned. The room was empty, but the chair behind him was slowly moving, as if someone had just stood up, and on the chair was a black railway ticket, printed with one destination, the last station. The investigators did not leave the room. They could not. The black ticket was still on the chair. Nobody had seen it appear. Nobody wanted to touch it. The destination was written in faded letters. The last station. They searched the railway database. No station with that name existed. They searched historical maps. Nothing. They searched abandoned railway lines. Still nothing. Then one investigator remembered the old photograph from 2003. The photograph showed the passenger standing beside a platform that no longer existed. He opened the image again. This time, they studied the station sign. The letters were almost unreadable, but after increasing the contrast, a name appeared. It was not the last station. It was simply a number, 17. They searched the railway archives for Station 17. A result appeared. The station had existed until October 14, 2003. Then it disappeared from all official records. Not closed, not demolished, removed. Its name had been erased from the railway database. The investigators found an old engineering report. The final entry was dated October 14, 2003. It stated that a passenger train had arrived at Station 17 at exactly 3:17 a.m. There were 17 passengers on board. 16 were recorded leaving the train. The 17th passenger was never recorded. The report ended with a handwritten note, "Do not reopen the station." The investigators finally had a possible explanation. The passenger was not appearing randomly. He was connected to a forgotten railway event, Station 17, a train, a missing passenger, and a time, 3:17 a.m. Perhaps every later appearance was connected to the same unresolved event. Perhaps the passenger was simply repeating the journey, again and again, across different years, different trains, different people. The black file may have been documenting the consequences. That explanation was strange, but it was still more reasonable than time travel, more reasonable than a supernatural passenger, more reasonable than a man who had not aged for decades. There was only one problem. The investigators found a modern railway map. Station 17 was marked on it, but not as a station, as a maintenance tunnel. They followed the coordinates. The entrance had been sealed for years. Inside was an abandoned section of railway. The tracks ended in darkness. They walked several hundred meters. Then they found an old platform, Station 17, still there, still intact, and waiting beside the platform was an old train carriage. The investigators recognized it immediately. It was the same carriage from the 2003 photograph, but there was something impossible about it. The carriage looked untouched. No rust, no broken windows, no dust. As if it had arrived only moments earlier. One investigator approached the door. It opened by itself. Inside, the lights were on. The seats were empty, except for one, seat 17. Someone was sitting there. The passenger. He looked exactly as he had in every photograph. He slowly turned toward them. Nobody spoke. Then he looked at the black file in the investigator's hands. His expression changed for the first time. Fear, he whispered. You found it. The investigator stepped closer. What is this place? The passenger looked toward the dark tunnel. The place where it started. What started? The passenger looked back at him. The first journey. Who are you? The passenger remained silent. Then he answered. I was the passenger. The investigator frowned. The passenger from 2003? The man shook his head. No. The passenger from 1981? No. Then who? The passenger looked at the empty seat beside him. The passenger who was supposed to arrive. The investigators did not understand. Then the passenger pointed toward the black file. You keep looking for the person inside the photographs. He paused. You should be looking at the person taking them. The investigator opened the file. The pages began turning by themselves. Photograph after photograph appeared. Every case, every disappearance, every impossible event. Then they reached the final page. There was only one photograph. It showed the investigators standing inside Station 17, the same moment. The same room, the same people. But the photograph had been taken from behind them, and standing behind the camera was the passenger. The investigator looked up. The passenger was still sitting in seat 17, but now he was smiling. Then the lights went out. For several seconds, there was complete darkness. When the lights returned, the passenger was gone. Only his suitcase remained. And on the seat was a final note. The last passenger has already arrived. The investigators slowly turned toward the tunnel. A distant train whistle echoed through the darkness. Then another. Then another. And this time, the sound was getting closer. The investigators stood inside Station 17. The train whistle grew louder, but there was still no train, only darkness. Then the lights above the platform flickered. Once, twice, and every clock inside the station stopped at the same time. 3:17 a.m. One investigator looked at the tunnel. Something was coming. A faint light appeared in the distance. It moved slowly toward them. The investigators stepped back. The light grew brighter. Then the train emerged. It was an old passenger train, the same model shown in the photographs from 2003. The same carriage, the same windows, the same faded number painted beside the door. 17. The train stopped. The doors opened. Nobody stepped out. Inside were 17 empty seats. Except one. Seat 17. The passenger was sitting there again. The investigators stared at him. He looked exactly the same. But this time, something was different. He was holding the black file. The investigator immediately checked his own hands. The copy of the file was still there. 2 black files. 2 identical folders. One in his hand. One in the passenger's hands. He stepped toward the train. Where did you get that? The passenger looked at him. You gave it to me. When? The passenger pointed toward the empty platform. Tomorrow. The investigator froze. The passenger opened the file. Inside was a photograph. He held it toward them. It showed the same platform, the same train, the same investigators. But there was one difference. Only 3 investigators were standing there. One was missing. The investigator looked around. There were 4 of them. He counted again. 4. Then he looked at the photograph. 3. The passenger closed the file. You still have time. The investigator remembered the sentence from the first journey. What happens at 3:17? The passenger looked toward the tunnel. The train leaves. And where does it go? The passenger answered quietly. Back to where you found it. That makes no sense. It never did. The investigator stepped closer. Are you the one behind the black file? The passenger shook his head. Then who is? The passenger looked past him, toward the fourth investigator. For the first time, everyone turned. The fourth investigator was standing several meters away. He was staring at the train. His expression was completely blank. The passenger spoke. He already knows. The fourth investigator slowly turned toward them. In his hand was a black envelope. The same envelope from the suitcase. The same symbol. The same handwriting. Nobody had seen him pick it up. The investigator holding the black file approached him. What is that? The man looked down at the envelope. I don't know. The passenger suddenly stood. Don't open it. Everyone became silent. The passenger had never sounded afraid before. Now he did. The investigator asked, Why? The passenger looked at the envelope. Because that is how I became the passenger. Nobody moved. The investigator opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. The image showed a railway platform. A man was standing beside a train. The photograph was old, very old. But the man was recognizable. It was the passenger. Then the investigator noticed something else. The passenger was not alone. A second man stood beside him. The face was partially hidden, but the clothes were unmistakable. The same clothes worn by the fourth investigator. The room became silent. The passenger whispered, He was there the first time. The investigator looked at the fourth man. You? The man shook his head. I have never been here. The passenger answered, You haven't been here yet. Then the train doors began to close. The investigators stepped backward. The passenger remained inside. Before the doors shut completely, he looked directly at the investigator holding the black file. One day, you will understand. Understand what? The passenger's final words were almost impossible to hear. You were never investigating the passenger. The doors closed. The train began moving. Slowly. Then faster. It disappeared into the tunnel. The station became silent again. The investigators stood there without speaking. Then they noticed something on the platform. A new photograph. It had appeared beside the tracks. The investigator picked it up. His hands began to shake. The photograph showed the train leaving Station 17. But the date printed on the back was not 2003. It was today's date. And beneath the date were 4 words. The passenger was you. The investigator turned the photograph over again. There was another line beneath it. A line written in the same handwriting as the black file. Next train, 3:17. Then the station lights went out. And from somewhere behind them, a fifth set of footsteps began walking toward the platform. The footsteps stopped. The investigators turned. Nobody was there. Only the abandoned platform, the dead lights, and the darkness beyond the tracks. Then one of the investigators noticed something on the floor. A railway ticket. He picked it up. The paper was warm. The destination was blank. The seat number was 17, and the departure time was 3:17 a.m. But the current time was already 3:29. The train had already left, or at least, that was what they believed. A sound came from the tunnel. A distant vibration. Then a light appeared. The same train was returning. The investigators watched in silence as it slowly emerged from the darkness. The doors opened. The carriage was empty. Every seat was vacant, except seat 17. The black file was sitting there. The investigator stepped inside. He reached for it, then stopped. There was something written on the cover. Not the usual symbol, not a case number. His own name. He opened the file. The first page contained a photograph. It showed the railway station. The second page showed the mysterious passenger. The third showed the suitcase. The fourth showed the old platform. Then came photographs of every case they had investigated. The signal, the witness, the room, the photograph, the call, the file, the passenger. Every event was there, but the final pages were different. They contained photographs of things that had not happened yet. The investigator turned the page. He saw himself standing on the same train. Another page. He was holding the black file. Another. He was sitting in seat 17. Another. He was wearing the dark coat. His hands began to shake. He looked toward the other investigators. Look at this. They stepped closer. Nobody spoke. The final photograph showed the mysterious passenger walking away from the train. But the face was no longer hidden. It was the investigator's face. The passenger had been him. Not today, not yesterday, but somewhere in a timeline nobody could understand. The investigator looked at the empty seat, then at the photographs. The pieces finally appeared to connect. The passenger was not simply traveling through time. He was caught inside a repeating journey. Each cycle began with someone discovering the black file. That person followed the evidence. They reached Station 17. They boarded the train. They became part of the record. Then the passenger appeared again, and the cycle started over. But one question remained. Who created the black file? The investigator turned to the final page. There was no photograph, only a sentence. You did. The room went completely silent. The investigator looked at the others. This is impossible. Then another sentence appeared beneath it. Not printed, written. The ink slowly formed across the paper. You have not written it yet. The investigator dropped the file. The pages scattered across the floor. One photograph landed face up. It showed the 4 investigators standing on the platform, but only 3 of them were visible. The 4th was behind the camera, taking the photograph. The same person who had taken every photograph in the black file. The investigator looked at the 4th member of the team. He was gone. The train doors suddenly closed. The carriage lights turned on. Inside the window, a reflection appeared. The mysterious passenger was sitting in seat 17, but when the investigator looked inside, the seat was empty. The reflection smiled, then disappeared. The train began moving. Slowly at first, then faster. The investigators watched it vanish into the tunnel. The black file remained on the platform. They opened it one final time. The pages were completely blank. Every photograph had disappeared. Every name, every case, everything, except one final line. And the black file was never found again. The investigator stared at the words. He recognized them. They were the exact words from the end of the previous case, the same sentence that had appeared before the passenger was discovered. Now he understood. The black file had not disappeared because someone stole it. It had disappeared because the investigation had reached the point where it was supposed to disappear. The file was not the evidence. The file was the cycle. The passenger was not the keeper. He was the result, and the people investigating him were not outside the mystery. They were already inside it. The station became silent. No train, no footsteps, no voices, only the sound of rain above the abandoned platform. The investigator looked toward the tunnel. For a moment, he thought he saw someone standing there, a man in a dark coat, holding an old suitcase, watching him. Then the figure disappeared. The investigation was officially closed. No passenger record was ever found. No ticket was ever registered. No camera captured him entering the train. No railway system recorded his arrival. And no one could explain how the photographs had been created. The passenger remained officially non-existent. But one piece of evidence survived. A photograph found inside the black file. It showed the mysterious passenger standing beside a train. On the back was a handwritten sentence. If nobody recorded my arrival, and beneath it, a second line. Who recorded my departure? The photograph was placed into evidence. The room was locked. The lights were switched off. The door was sealed. The investigators left. Nobody returned. But 3 days later, the evidence room camera recorded something strange. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the locked door opened. No one entered. No one left. The camera showed only an empty corridor. Then, for 3 seconds, the image went black. When it returned, the photograph was gone, and beside the empty evidence box was a fresh railway ticket. Seat 17, destination unknown, passenger name, blank. The black file was never found again. But somewhere in the darkness, a train was still waiting.